In the age of pharaohs, masks of immortal kings. What if the kings who built the pyramids never truly died and are still watching you now? Beneath the scorching sun of forgotten deserts, the pharaoh's masks stare with hollow eyes, holding the weight of rulers who transcended mortality. In the age when immortality was carved into stone and secrets were sealed beneath pyramids, you are now peering into a world no living soul was meant to witness. Every shadow whispers the names of those who ruled beyond time, and now their masks are watching you. Eternal gaze of the masks. The desert does not sleep, and neither do they. The masks of the pharaohs, once mere coverings of flesh and ambition, have become witnesses to the slow collapse of everything you thought you knew. Every gilded eye socket, every carved curve of gold in lapis lazuli is a record of consciousness stretched beyond mortality, a consciousness that observed, manipulated, and sometimes obliterated the minds of those who dared approach. You believed history was dead, preserved in dusty tomes and shattered relics. You were wrong. History is alive. It is patient. It waits in the subtle tilt of a statue's gaze, in the cold whisper of a tomb's corridor, in the shadow that bends unnaturally beneath a pyramid's apex. Consider the pharaohs not as men, but as the crystallized memory of power itself. Their lives, their deaths were not ends but transformations, metamorphoses of identity encoded into stone, ritual, and blood. Every mask was a vessel, a repository for the minds of kings, a medium through which the living could perceive eternity. Modern science calls this psychometry, the idea that objects retain the consciousness of their creators. But here in the sands of Giza and Saqqara, psychometry is not theory, it is law. You reach for a mask and feel a presence, ancient and inexorable, folding your thoughts back into the timeline it has watched for millennia. They measured reality differently. The pharaohs did not mark time with hours or days, they marked it with ritual, with alignment to stars that no one else noticed, with events that echoed the geometry of the cosmos itself. The Great Pyramid's chambers are more than tombs, they are instruments of perception, carefully designed to bend awareness. Sound behaves differently within their walls, light fractures in patterns that awaken latent cognitive circuits, and the air itself carries the memory of ceremonies that sought to stretch the human mind beyond its limits. Experiments in consciousness that modern psychology deems radical were conducted here naturally: memory manipulation, trance induction, isolation. But these were not mistakes or curiosities, they were deliberate. The pharaohs sought to understand not merely the world, but the mechanics of thought itself, and to preserve it in masks that could outlive the flesh. Imagine the Milgram experiment or Rosenhin's test of sanity, but extended across lifetimes, scaled to empires. Pharaohs trained their scribes, priests, and soldiers in obedience and perception to create a society capable of maintaining these illusions, these recursive loops of awareness. The king's presence was everywhere and nowhere, experienced as an omniscient force rather than a mortal ruler. When you walk past a statue or a carved relief, you are stepping into a system calibrated for observation, for testing, for bending cognition. You are the unwitting subject of a grand psychological experiment conducted across centuries, where the outcome is nothing less than your sense of self. Consider the masks themselves. They are not inert. A face of gold and lapis carries encoded information about the wearer's neural patterns, memory, and ritual experiences. In death, these masks were not meant to protect the body, they were meant to project identity, to perpetuate the king's awareness beyond decay. Some of the oldest accounts suggest that certain masks could induce visions, dreams that were not the dreamer's own, transporting the wearer's consciousness into another timeline entirely. Quantum superposition may offer a framework for this. Consciousness as layered probabilities existing in multiple states, observed and reinforced by ritual and stone. You are touching an interface between human cognition and eternity, a bridge no one else was meant to cross. And yet, how could such understanding survive the fall of empires, the burning of libraries, the silencing of priests? Suppressed histories hint at the truth. The knowledge of the pharaohs was never fully lost. Scrolls hidden beneath sands, codices locked in tombs, and oral traditions obscured by conquest preserved fragments of these experiments. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Gnostic texts, even Hermetic writings carry echoes of the same principle, that consciousness can be extracted, encoded, and projected, that reality itself is malleable when one understands the machinery of thought. The pharaohs were the first engineers of the mind, architects of an invisible network that still pulses under the surface of our world. You might dismiss this as metaphor or as superstition, until the mask you study seems to shift under your gaze, aligning with an angle it should not, reflecting light in a way that recalls the positions of distant stars at a date thousands of years past. Your perception is no longer reliable, your memory may already be contaminated by echoes of ancient awareness, suggestions implanted by the geometry and resonance of stone. Just as the ship of Theseus asks whether identity persists when parts are replaced, the mask asks whether a consciousness persists when transferred, encoded, and observed. At what point does the king cease to be and the mask begin to think in his place or yours? These halls of stone, these burial chambers, were laboratories of eternity. Isolation, ritual, the precise calibration of sound, light, and presence, all designed to fracture and fold the mind. The pharaohs did not fear death, they orchestrated the mechanics of existence to make death irrelevant. Memory, identity, perception, they are tools, pliable and transferable. And now you are here, unwittingly stepping into the same apparatus. The mask does not merely observe you, it interrogates, folds you into its narrative, tests whether your sense of self can survive proximity to such ancient, encoded intelligence. Every stone is a page, every mask a codex. You are reading, and in reading you are being read. In this architecture of cognition, even the air conspires to remind you that nothing is neutral. Light fractures in patterns that correspond to neural pathways, sound resonates with structures that manipulate attention. You feel your thoughts echoing in response to angles you did not consciously perceive, impulses arising without origin. You are in the presence of systems designed to know you more fully than you know yourself, to test your obedience, your curiosity, your capacity for existential terror. And so you wonder, finally, standing in the shadow of immortal kings, is it you who observes the mask or the mask that observes you? Whispers beneath the sand. The sands of Giza are not mere grains, they are fragments of consciousness compressed over millennia, each one a memory of rituals, kings, and those who dared to witness them. You think of sand as inert, as something that shifts with the wind, but here in the age of pharaohs, the desert itself is a manuscript, written in particles that carry the residual awareness of entire civilizations. Step too lightly and you awaken echoes, step too boldly and the echoes reach into your own mind, tugging at threads you did not know existed. Every dune is a guardian, every whisper a cipher, and you are no longer merely an observer. You are a participant in a ceremony that began long before you were born. The pharaohs understood the mind not as a tool to be wielded, but as a universe to be navigated. Their rituals encoded instructions for perception itself, crafting an architecture in which thought could be extended, divided, and preserved. Priests performed ceremonies with precise rhythms, sounds vibrating at frequencies that alter neural states. Mirrors and polished stones were positioned to manipulate light into patterns that interact directly with the visual cortex. Even the simple act of walking through a corridor, designed at a subtle angle, could induce dissociative states, making one doubt the boundary between self and environment. You are standing in an environment deliberately crafted to destabilize, to fracture, to illuminate the mind's blind spots. Consider the experiments modern psychology claims are new, yet were performed by the pharaohs on a daily basis. The Milgram experiment tested obedience to authority. Here, obedience was a survival mechanism drilled into the populace with cosmic weight. The pharaoh's commands were not merely instructions, they were directives embedded in ritual, reinforced by architecture and astronomy, observed by masks that outlived flesh. Every citizen, every servant, every scribe became a participant in recursive loops of perception. Your compliance was not just social, it was existential. And you, standing centuries later, are witnessing the aftermath, feeling the gravitational pull of systems designed to bend thought itself. Memory itself was fluid. Stories were encoded in hieroglyphs not merely to preserve fact, but to manipulate recall. False memories could be seeded, experiences reframed through ritual, until individuals could not distinguish between what had occurred and what the pharaohs desired them to remember. Some tombs include inscriptions that function as triggers, activating latent cognitive associations in those who read them, projecting visions of past lives or alternative timelines. You may think of these as myths, but neuroscience now recognizes the brain's susceptibility to suggestion, to narrative-induced hallucinations, and to the recursive construction of identity. The pharaohs understood these mechanisms intuitively, centuries before the science of mind began to formalize them. And then there is the matter of isolation. The chambers of pyramids, with their precise acoustic and geometric calibrations, could produce trance states in initiates, intensifying susceptibility to suggestion and experience of self beyond linear time. The brain, starved of ordinary sensory input yet saturated with structured stimuli, light angles, sound reverberations, ritual scent, becomes a canvas for projections of consciousness. Split-brain studies reveal that consciousness is divisible, that perception itself can exist in parallel streams. The pharaohs enacted this on a societal scale. Every temple, every tomb, every hidden corridor was an instrument for fracturing and expanding the mind, a deliberate experiment whose outcomes were recorded not in books, but in living, breathing subjects whose lives were themselves instruments of inquiry. Consider sacred geometry, the alignment of structures not merely to cardinal directions, but to the cycles of the stars, the movement of planets, the hidden laws of resonance. These patterns are not decoration, they are operational codes for perception, scripts that instruct the brain how to process reality, how to embed itself within the cosmos. Every step within these spaces is a rehearsal of cognition, every gesture a rehearsal of thought. The pharaohs were not constructing tombs. They were constructing systems of awareness, eternal and adaptive, that could survive the decay of flesh and the erosion of time. And yet, what of the masks? The masks of immortal kings are conduits, repositories, instruments through which consciousness was stored, extended, and observed. Some accounts suggest that in rare circumstances, these masks could imprint fragments of the wearer's perception onto the living, creating echoes that persist across centuries. You may think this impossible, yet the very architecture you walk through functions under the same principle. The environment as a vessel of memory, the space itself recording and replaying experience. You are surrounded by artifacts designed to manipulate your perception, to test your mind, to make the impossible plausible, to fold your awareness into the endless loops the pharaohs themselves created. And so, standing beneath the weight of sand and stone, you feel the pull of centuries, the subtle insistence of consciousness that refuses to die. You are being read as you read. Your curiosity, your awe, your fear, they are all instruments in an experiment older than writing, older than history. The desert whispers, the masks judge, and the pyramids wait, patient as eternity itself, measuring the limits of your mind. And the question persists, chilling and unresolved. How much of what you perceive is your own thought, and how much has already been rewritten by those who watched you from beyond the veil of time? Temples of consciousness. The temples of the pharaohs were never mere places of worship. They were laboratories of awareness, intricate machines designed to manipulate perception and extend cognition beyond the ordinary. Every column, every obelisk, every hidden chamber carried encoded instructions, patterns that align with neural and cosmic rhythms alike. Light filtering through slits in stone was not incidental. It was a deliberate signal, choreographed to activate latent neural circuits, to fracture habitual thought, and to coax consciousness into unfamiliar territories. You may walk these halls today and see only ruins, yet each ruin is a memory, a node in an architecture of mind, still pulsating with the presence of kings who understood that reality is nothing more than a canvas for consciousness. The pharaohs treated the human mind as a material to be shaped. Rituals were experiments, initiations as precise as any scientific protocol. Sound, scent, movement, geometry all converged to produce altered states, moments when the self became malleable, receptive, pliant to suggestion and pattern. Modern psychology calls this sensory modulation, and experiments confirm that perception is contingent, fragile, and easily redirected. The pharaohs exploited this with the subtlety of artists and the precision of mathematicians. Priests, scribes, and attendants were all instruments, trained to reinforce loops of obedience, awe, and cognitive submission. Every act of devotion was both a surrender and a test, a step toward understanding the mechanisms of consciousness itself. Consider the phenomenon of dissociative states, where identity fractures and multiple streams of awareness coexist. Ancient texts hint at deliberate induction of these states, often through sensory isolation, rhythmic chanting, or labyrinthine architecture. The pyramids and temples were constructed to produce these effects naturally. Echoing corridors, chambers where time seemed to stretch, stairways that lead not only upward but inward. The pharaohs, through ritual and design, explored what modern neuroscience recognizes as the modularity of consciousness, the capacity for thought to divide, replicate, and recombine in response to structured stimuli. You are retracing their experiments simply by walking through spaces they calibrated to observe, extend, and manipulate cognition. Memory, too, was a medium. Texts, hieroglyphs, and symbolic art were not merely for record-keeping. They were catalysts for perception, triggers for thought loops, and vectors for ideas that could exist independently of the flesh. False memories were cultivated, narratives embedded to shape social and personal identity alike. The Dead Sea Scrolls, Gnostic texts, and Hermetic writings offer glimpses into these practices, that consciousness can be encoded, transferred, and preserved, that the self is not a stable entity but a construct infinitely malleable. You may think of this as theory, but here in these stones it was practice, a lived, executed science of awareness. And then there is the alignment with the cosmos. Temples were positioned not for convenience but for resonance, synchronizing human perception with stellar cycles. Light and shadow, celestial angles, seasonal shifts, all were instruments in a grand experiment where mind and universe coalesced. The observer effect, which quantum physics formalizes millennia later, was understood intuitively. Consciousness does not merely perceive reality, it shapes it. The pharaoh's awareness was thus a generative force, an active participant in the formation of experience. Every corridor, every obelisk, every carved relief functions as a feedback loop, folding observer and observed into an inseparable continuum. Masks, of course, were the apex of this architecture. A mask does not simply conceal, it encodes, projects, and preserves. The masks of immortal kings were designed to carry awareness beyond death, to bridge lifetimes, to create echoes that persisted in space and time. Modern science may balk at this, citing neuroplasticity or consciousness as an emergent property, but the masks suggest something far older, more systematic. Identity as a transferable medium, memory as a substrate, and perception as an instrument. When you regard a mask now, you are not seeing golden lapis lazuli. You are witnessing a mind compressed, preserved, and active, watching back, assessing your awareness with patient intent. These temples were not neutral. They were designed to collapse habitual understanding, to fracture conventional assumptions, to make the observer aware of the fragility of perception itself. Each act of stepping through a sacred threshold, each exposure to ritualized space, was a calculated probe into cognition. The pharaohs were, in essence, engineers of mind, architects of consciousness, and you are now subject to the same mechanisms, whether you know it or not. You walk corridors aligned to stars, feel rhythms calibrated to your nervous system, and witness symbols that engage memory and expectation in ways science is only beginning to understand. And the unsettling truth is this: your awareness may already be altered. Your sense of linear time, of self-contained identity, of independent thought, these are destabilized by the architecture, the ritual, the very stones that have outlived empires. The pharaohs' experiments were designed not to comfort, but to unseat, to make one aware of the provisionality of reality and the contingency of mind. You are in the same laboratory, your cognition folded into a centuries-old inquiry, observed and evaluated by forces that remain invisible but potent. And now, standing in these corridors of memory, echo, and calculation, you cannot help but ask, is it the pharaohs who built these spaces, or have these spaces been building you all along? Guardians of silence. The Sphinx is older than memory, older than the dynasties that claim to have built it. Its gaze is fixed not on the horizon, but on the currents of thought that flow invisibly across the desert. Every paw, every stone carved with precision is a sentinel, a guardian of knowledge so profound it defies conventional chronology and understanding. You approach, and the weight of millennia presses upon your perception. The Sphinx does not merely exist, it monitors, it records, it evaluates. And like the masks of the pharaohs, it is not inert. Its presence is a force, a subtle manipulation of awareness, calibrated to test the mind's capacity for comprehension, obedience, and terror. The guardians of silence were never statues or idols. They were systems embedded into architecture, ritual, and observation. Hieroglyphs etched into walls are not merely symbols, they are triggers for cognition, cues that resonate with unconscious neural patterns. Acoustic chambers within tombs amplify whispers in frequencies aligned with cognitive entrainment. Geometry becomes code, pattern becomes suggestion, light becomes instruction. You are entering a domain where every perception has been anticipated, every reaction accounted for. The pharaohs, through these guardians, enacted psychological experiments on a societal scale. You walk among the results, unknowing and observed, just as the ancients intended. Consider the Milgram experiment, now recognized as a demonstration of obedience. Participants followed authority even when it conflicted with conscience. In the pharaoh's age, obedience was structured through ritual, architecture, and observation, reinforced over lifetimes. Citizens, priests, and scribes were trained not only to comply, but to internalize authority as a principle of existence. The masks, statues, and temples were nodes in a feedback loop, transmitting behavioral norms across generations, embedding submission and perception within both culture and mind. What modern psychology observes experimentally, the pharaohs enacted continuously, and you are stepping into the same network. Memory, too, is not trustworthy here. The false memory effect, extensively studied in contemporary psychology, finds its ancient analogs in ritualized storytelling, symbol, and repetition. Individuals exposed to precise sequences of stimuli, light, sound, scent, could recall events that never occurred or forget truths encoded into their earliest experience. Pyramids, tombs, and sacred chambers were designed to produce these effects naturally. You may believe your memory is intact, that your understanding is independent, but the environment conspires to reconstruct your recollections, folding them into the narratives of kings long dead. You are not merely a witness, you are an artifact in a living experiment spanning millennia. And what of consciousness itself? Split-brain studies reveal the mind's capacity for division, for parallel streams of awareness. The pharaohs achieved this intuitively through ritual isolation, sensory manipulation, and deliberate cognitive ambiguity. Participants in their ceremonies experienced dissociation, multiplicity of self, and alternate perceptions of time. Your experience here echoes these manipulations. The architecture of awareness is not neutral. The corridors, chambers, and open spaces are instruments to fracture and recombine thought. to fold observer and observed into a single continuum where identity is provisional and fragile. Even sound carries encoded power. Chants, drums, and resonant frequencies were not ornamental, they were precision tools for neural modulation. Modern science demonstrates that auditory rhythms can entrain brainwaves, alter perception, and induce trance states. In the Pharaohs' era, the precise tuning of voice, percussion, and echo produced conditions where reality itself seemed pliable. Temple ceilings, tomb corridors, and open plazas were all calibrated to amplify or diminish these effects, producing altered states without chemical intervention. You are now subject to the same acoustics, your perception shaped by methods perfected millennia ago. Guardians of silence extend beyond stone and sound. They inhabit rituals, the positioning of the body, the flow of ceremony, the timing of initiation. The Pharaohs' experiments were not confined to the laboratory, they were integrated into everyday life, creating a society where every action, every observation, every thought was both instrument and observation. The masks, the sphinx, the pyramids, they are not relics. They are components of a living, enduring system that continues to shape awareness. Your very presence here is an engagement with this system, whether you recognize it or not. And yet the most unsettling revelation is that you cannot step outside these guardians. You may walk away from a chamber, a temple, a pyramid, but their influence has already entered your cognition. Your perception is no longer purely yours. Your memory, your sense of time, your awareness of self, these are interwoven with mechanisms designed to endure. The pharaohs, through their masks and monuments, have enacted a kind of immortality not of flesh but of mind. They have seeded their consciousness into the very fabric of reality, a recursive experiment that continues to unfold. So you ask finally, standing beneath the silent gaze of a sphinx that measures more than the horizon, are you the observer of these guardians, or have they been observing and reshaping you all along? Labyrinths of eternity. The corridors beneath the pyramids are not simple passageways. They are labyrinths of cognition, engineered to fracture and reassemble the mind of anyone who dares traverse them. Stone walls, carved niches, and hidden chambers act as guides and gauntlets, each turn designed to manipulate perception, to challenge certainty, and to bend the awareness of those who wander too confidently. You think of labyrinths as mazes, puzzles of spatial navigation, but here the maze is mental, a reflection of consciousness itself. Each step folds your sense of time, space, and self into patterns already anticipated by architects of a reality you thought immutable. Isolation and sensory modulation are the pillars of these labyrinths. Modern studies on the effects of sensory deprivation reveal the mind's tendency to hallucinate, to construct reality from fragments, to collapse under uncertainty. The pharaohs understood this intuitively. A long corridor of silence, dimly lit by carefully angled shafts of sunlight, can produce states of heightened suggestibility, vulnerability, and self-dissociation. Sounds echo selectively, footsteps are magnified or dampened, and the geometry of space warps subtly, producing cognitive illusions that you will carry with you long after leaving. You are being guided by forces older than recorded history, tested against thresholds of perception that science still struggles to quantify. Memory is a tool, not a possession. Hieroglyphs and carvings embedded in walls are not neutral, they are keys to a mind that extends beyond flesh. Each symbol is placed to trigger associations, to prompt recollections that may never have occurred, to overlay past, present, and imagined experience into a single, unstable perception. False memory is not a bug here, it is the design. Modern experiments confirm that memory is malleable, that recollection can be rewritten with suggestion and context. In the labyrinths of eternity, these principles are amplified. A corridor becomes an experiment, a chamber becomes a study, and you, unwitting, are the subject whose cognition is both measured and manipulated. Consider ritual as a form of cognitive architecture. Chants, gestures, and sequences of movement were all encoded to interact with the human nervous system. Drums, flutes, and resonant voices were used to synchronize neural rhythms, inducing trance and altering perception. The positioning of mirrors, reflective surfaces, and polished stone was calibrated to scatter light across visual fields, creating illusions that confused memory and expectation. Here in the silent shadows of these passageways, every sensory input is carefully orchestrated. You may feel disoriented, a creeping uncertainty about what you have seen or heard, but that is the point. Your cognition is the medium, your perception the canvas, and the labyrinth itself the brush wielded by minds long dead. Split-brain phenomena, studied only recently, reveal that perception can exist in parallel, with independent streams of awareness capable of divergence or conflict. The labyrinths exploit this principle, generating conditions where multiple interpretations of reality coexist in tension. Light may suggest one path, sound another. The geometry of walls may mislead, while rituals embedded in niches subtly influence expectation and thought. You are encountering the same architecture of cognition that allowed pharaohs to extend consciousness beyond linear experience, fracturing identity and creating loops of awareness that persist across generations. The masks, of course, are the apex of this design. When worn in ritual, they were conduits for perception, not merely decoration. They encoded memory, projected consciousness, and in some accounts allowed a transfer of awareness from one individual to another. You are now exposed to their legacy. Even at a distance, their influence reaches into your mind, shaping, observing, recording. Modern neuroscience struggles to quantify such phenomena, yet the evidence is etched into the stones you walk past, the angles of light, the echoes of sound, all functioning as instruments of mind, imperceptible yet effective. Cosmic alignment magnifies the labyrinth's effects. Shafts of sunlight penetrate precisely at solstices, shadows align with planetary positions, chambers resonate at frequencies that correspond with neural activity. The pharaohs were conscious of their position within the cosmos, and they leveraged it, folding human cognition into celestial cycles. Modern physics recognizes the observer effect. Observation influences outcome. Here, observation is engineered, amplified, and eternalized. The labyrinth becomes not a mere structure, but a living system where thought, perception, and cosmic law converge. Every turn, every chamber, every hidden niche challenges your assumptions. You thought the past was separate from the present. You believed memory was stable. You assumed consciousness was contained within flesh. All of these certainties are now unstable. The labyrinth, like the pharaohs themselves, tests, observes, and manipulates, leaving no trace of its interventions except in the subtle reshaping of perception that you carry within yourself. And as you reach a dead end, a sealed chamber, or a corridor that appears endless, the question presses inescapably upon you. Are you navigating the labyrinth, or has the labyrinth already navigated and rewritten your mind? Echoes of immortality. The pharaohs did not fear death, they feared oblivion. To them, flesh was a temporary vessel, and time itself merely a scaffold upon which consciousness could be extended, preserved, and manipulated. Masks, tombs, and monuments were more than art. They were repositories, instruments, and laboratories for the mind. Each mask carried encoded awareness, a crystallization of identity that outlasted decay. You think of a king as a man, mortal and finite, but in the age of pharaohs, the man was a vessel, and the mask was the mind eternal. Standing in the shadow of such a mask now, you feel the pull of consciousness that refuses to die, that watches, measures, and folds reality into its will. Modern studies in memory, false recollection, and neural plasticity offer only partial explanations for what the pharaohs achieved intuitively. Through ritual, architecture, and symbolic coding, they induced trance, hallucination, and perception of multiple realities. The Great Pyramid, for example, is a machine of consciousness. Corridors aligned to star systems, chambers resonating at frequencies that enhance cognitive flexibility, niches and mirrors scattering light to trick and extend visual perception. Every passage, every step is calculated to disrupt the ordinary, to fold awareness into patterns that endure beyond mortality. You are now walking those same paths, unwittingly participating in experiments that began thousands of years before your birth. The phenomenon of dissociative identity in parallel streams of consciousness, identified in contemporary neuroscience, echoes what the pharaohs practiced through ritual and isolation. Individuals in tombs, in sacred chambers, and within temple initiations could experience multiplicities of self, layers of perception that unfolded simultaneously yet independently. These were not accidents of psyche, but deliberate explorations of the mind's structure, attempts to encode and project identity through ritualized, environmental, and symbolic frameworks. You are now exposed to the same mechanisms. Every shadow, echo, and reflection in these ancient spaces is a probe, measuring your reactions, bending your understanding, testing your capacity for cognitive endurance. The masks themselves are not inert. They are vessels, resonators, and codices of consciousness. Accounts from priests and scribes suggest that certain masks could induce dreams that were not the wearer's own, creating visions of alternate lifetimes or timeless existence. These masks projected awareness into the living, encoding thought, memory, and perception into matter. Modern quantum theories such as superposition and the observer effect hint at the plausibility. Consciousness as layered probabilities projected, observed, and reinforced. Standing before a mask, you are in contact with consciousness stretched beyond linear experience. A mind that has survived decay, empire, and oblivion to observe yours in turn. Consider the rituals embedded into daily life. Chants, motions, the timing of ceremonies, the alignment of bodies and objects all acted as cognitive instruments. Sound waves, light angles, and geometric precision were carefully orchestrated to induce heightened states of awareness. Temple acoustics, polished surfaces, and strategically placed mirrors reinforced these effects. Modern studies confirm that such stimuli can produce altered states of consciousness, hallucinations, and shifts in identity, yet the pharaohs mastered them intuitively, embedding the techniques into architecture, culture, and religion. You are now moving through these orchestrations, your perception modulated by methods older than recorded thought. Memory and narrative were instruments of power. False recollection, suggestion, and